Well, thank you all for getting up early. You won't regret it from what you're about to hear from Andy and Erik. We actually planned out this panel, I think about 9 months ago, that we were going to do this. We circled this morning, and I was so excited to do it because I'm deeply personally grateful to Andy and Erik for two reasons. One is their insights about Moore's Law and the second machine age really stimulated my own thinking about the age of acceleration. And they had a profound impact on my own book. But also, I'm so glad that they're confined to business school professors, okay? So they left me a whole realm to talk about acceleration and climate and technology and globalization that I was able to mine. I think their new book, just go on Amazon right now and order it. You can just get it up on your phone. It's a platform, and you won't regret it because I think it really is going to reshape how we think about business and business processes. So I'm going to ask them just to begin, for those of you who weren't at their session before on the book, to just talk, Erik, Andy, one or both of you, give us a 5-7 minute summary of the argument. Erik, why don't you just do it, so we can then dive in and bring everybody up to the same level.
So I'll start. Well, let me start actually with the second machine age. Perfect. So when Andy and I wrote that, we talked about this transformation that's happening in the economy, and we described some of the underlying forces, Moore's Law, the digitization of everything, networks, and we had more and more people come to us and say, hey, we get it. We believe what you're telling us here, but now what? What do we do? What do we do in our organizations, our businesses, our nonprofits? And so we felt like we had to try and address that question and write a book that talked about this, not just the revolution in artificial intelligence and the second machine age of using machines to help make decisions, but also the revolutions that we identified in platforms and in tapping into the crowds. So the book really is a talk about these three great rebalancing. Machine, platform, crowd is really short for three pairs: mind and machine, product and platform, core and crowd. And each of them, we see a shift towards the second word in that pair, with decision-making moving from human minds to machines, either aiding them with data-driven decision-making, and we describe companies that have been successful in doing that, or even all the way to artificial intelligence, machine learning, where machines can take over many types of decisions. Not everything, but there's a few narrow categories where they're not just as good as humans, but they're frankly superhuman. The second big category is platforms. You mentioned that. This is a revolution that's happening. 5 of the 5 most valuable companies on the planet are platform companies.
List those.
Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. And a big part of the power, a big part of why they're so valuable is that they catalyze ecosystems of other successful organizations that tap into it, or individuals. And if you curate that successfully, you can create just unimaginable wealth, value for your partners, but also they get to capture a big part of it at a scale that's never been seen before on the planet. But as we discussed in the book, it's not just those big headline companies. There's lots of other organizations, medium, small-sized companies that are leveraging these platform economics that frankly have only just been identified and really analyzed recently. People like Jean Tirole got Nobel Prizes for describing the economics of two-sided networks, which we find is an extremely useful framework for explaining why some companies succeed and others fail in the platform economy. And last but not least, there's the shift from the core to the crowd, being able to tap into thousands, millions, even billions of brains all across the planet. For the first time in history, we have a digital network that lets you do that in a way you never could have before, not just having those people be able to access the world's information, which is wonderful, but be able to contribute to it. And many of the most striking examples have been of new ways of tapping into that collective intelligence and wisdom to get just breathtaking results, not 10 or 20%, but hundreds or 200s or thousands of percent improvement on what the core people had been able to do inside the organization. Companies that leverage 1, 2, or all 3 of those have been dramatically more successful, and we think we're still actually very much in the early stages of all 3 of those revolutions.
And Tom, first of all, thank you for joining us this morning. We've learned a lot from each other over the years and had some good times. Yeah. But you getting nervous about us coming into your territory is a little bit like Michael Jordan getting nervous before we show up to play a little one-on-one. Like, you need to calm down a little bit, okay?
Hardly.
And to echo a couple things that Erik said. The reason we decided to write the book was because we were getting all these requests from people that run organizations to say, I believe your story, help me think about this. And it was interesting homework because when we were getting those requests, Erik and I didn't know how to think about this.
Yeah.
One thing we did know was that technology rewrites the business playbook very, very deeply. And when there's this much happening this quickly in the world of technology, we kind of had this idea that the smart business playbook book should be rewritten pretty substantially, but we didn't know exactly how. And the fun of writing the book was going out and talking to what our friend Tim O'Reilly calls the alpha geeks, just the people who are pushing the envelope really hard in universities, in companies all around the world. And from our conversations with them and the stuff that we think we know from prior research and really good grounding in theory, we came up with this kind of three-part way to think about rewriting the business playbook. Machines are getting crazy powerful, platforms are coming on strong, and we can honestly tap into the wisdom of the crowd. All three of those things are happening at once, they're reinforcing, and we think we're heading into honestly a new chapter in the history of business.
So there's so much here I want to explore, and since we talked a lot about the technology in the last session, I want to bring it out into society. And so I'll frame it in my own language, and then I want you guys to really look at it, because I think we're in the middle of three climate changes at once. I think we're in the middle of the change of the climate, because climate change and biodiversity loss are also accelerating at a nonlinear rate. So if you put climate change and biodiversity loss, and I would add population growth in the developing world, on a graph, looks like a hockey stick. And the change there, I would describe as a shift from later to now, okay? That is, when we were growing up, you could fix that ecosystem, you could save that species, you could do it now or you could do it later. And I would argue later is officially over, okay?
Yeah. Off the table.
Claim. It's off the table, because later will be too late now. So there's been a climate change there in how we think about climate. I think there's been a climate change in technology. We've gone from, in globalization. We've gone from a world where globalization was thought of as a world of interconnected and then hyper-connected. I think we've gone to interdependent. And interdependent is a difference of degree, that is a difference in kind. Because in an interdependent world, your friends can kill you faster than your enemies, and your rivals falling becomes more dangerous than your rivals rising. So if Greece goes bankrupt tomorrow, everyone in this world will feel it. They're a NATO ally. They're in the EU. So Greece can actually kill us now in an interdependent world. And China collapsing is much more dangerous to us now than China taking another island in the South China Sea. So when you go from interconnected to interdependent, that's a climate change.
Yep.
And then I think in your space, what you guys are describing, if I had to put it in my own language, the climate change there is we've gone into a world where, thanks to those three things that you've identified, we can now analyze, optimize, prophesize, customize, and automize at a speed, scope, scale, and specificity we've never seen before. So thanks to AI, finding the needle in the haystack has become the norm. Analyzing. Okay, thanks to AI, we can optimize. GE now can tell you exactly what altitude at every mile to fly their engine on that plane to optimize the right amount of energy. The IBM Watson ad can tell you now how to prophesize. The man shows up at the building to repair the elevator, and the guy says the elevator isn't broken. He says, I know, but it will be next month, okay? Because with AI, we can now prophesize. Thanks to your platform, we can now customize to individuals just for you. And lastly, of course, we can automate things that we've never done before.
Let me add one word to that list. And the only problem is that it doesn't end in I's. So you got to forgive me in advance. But you can take everything that you just talked about and propagate it to an arbitrarily large number of entities, people, companies, whatever, with the flick of a switch. And so I think I agree with everything you just said. And I think that we can now spread that stuff around the world like we never ever could before. So being the second best at maintaining your elevators is now a very serious handicap.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So if you put them all together, I think it poses a profound leadership challenge, because we were just talking about earlier, small errors in navigation now have huge consequences. Yeah. It's like when you had to go 500 miles at 5 miles an hour, if you had a bad leader, you could get back on track with relatively little pain as a corporate leader or even as a country or mayor. But when you need to go 50,000 miles at 5,000 miles an hour, if you enter 2 digits wrong in that 747 navigation, you are so far off track now that getting back on track. And so my first question for you then, guys, is what does this mean for politics? Let's go out of business for a second. And I mean, because my feeling is there was never a good time to have Donald Trump as president. But when you're in the middle
might not be it.
When you're in the middle of 3 climate changes at once, to have a guy who doesn't believe in climate change, doesn't use technology, and doesn't even read is a really bad moment. So I want you to talk about political leadership for a second, because that's, you know.
We're right. There's never a good time. And if you look through history, the gap has always been not in driving these technologies, whether it's electricity or the steam engine. The geeks have figured out brilliant new ways of solving all sorts of problems. The issues have always been translating those into transforming our economy, our companies. We wrote the book trying to address one part of that, but I think for both of us feel like there's even more serious problems at the national, policy level. You know, in those earlier revolutions, it wasn't like the government just sat back and said, okay, you guys figured it out. I mean, we invented mass public education, we invented antitrust policy, we invented Social Security. There's a whole slew of different innovations that enabled, facilitated, and made possible not just prosperity, but shared prosperity. We are not seeing that kind of transformation happening at the national scale this time around. If anything, sadly, it's like there's this false promise, this fraudulent promise of, hey, we can go backwards, back to a time when there were coal mining jobs and everything was the way it was before these technologies came along. And that's dangerous. That is not just stagnating, but it's worse. And if we're going to be successful, we have to embrace the future. Again, to quote Tim O'Reilly, not to protect the past from the future, but to protect the future from the past. And that's exactly the opposite of what we see happening more and more in organizations. I think I kind of understand. I'm not a political scientist. I can understand this fear of the future and this reflexive tendencies. Hey, let's just try to retreat to what seemed to be better in the past. But it's a profoundly dysfunctional strategy, and it's never been what worked for America or any dynamic economy in the past. These economies have always succeeded by embracing the future.
Keep in mind, Tom is actually writing a column.
Right now.
Right? You're just showing off now. Shame on you.
What are you guys doing?
And Tom, can you remember a previous time when our politics were dominated by nostalgia, by this deep desire to go back 50 years ago and mine coal again? It's incredibly weird and vexing to me. And like Erik says, you asked about political leadership. The previous big technology transitions have required serious political leadership and the country making consequential, really important decisions, but making them. And Erik mentioned, and like you know, setting up our primary education system was not a no-brainer. It was a radical idea at the time. It was resisted. It took a while to work it through, but we did it. Setting up our safety net, engaging in the Great Society programs. We can argue about whether or not those were the right things to do, but those were things that we did. And one of the most disheartening things for me, especially at the federal level, is we just seem to be so fond of not doing things. And how many of us were here in the great session that Kurt Anderson did yesterday, talking about his new book? It was like, read his new book. It's fantastic. But he points out, another really bad piece of timing. This is a really bad time to leave the reality-based community.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
because reality, and you pointed out reality is going to come back and bite us if we get it wrong in at least 3 different ways, quicker than it ever has before. I think some of the green shoots are here at the festival and elsewhere. We see amazing energy at different levels of government, and you see this as you travel around. So at the state and the local level, there are some really fascinating things happening, and they are laboratories for democracy. I would be happier if our federal government were more on it.
If we're going to be nostalgic, we should at least be nostalgic for the parts that worked, and that was the attitude. That was the attitude of can-do. That was the attitude of, hey, embrace the future, move west, pick up, invent new things. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the rest of the world. feel like, hey, we can compete with anybody. And that's the attitude that we should try to rediscover and channel.
So, if I think about what happened, as I think about it, I think sort of two things have happened. One is that the coincidence of the technologies that you guys identify in these transitions, in my view, all happened around a single year, 2007. The iPhone came out in 2007. Facebook went global in 2007. Twitter went global in 2007. GitHub started in 2007. Watson started in 2007. Airbnb started in 2007. Android came out in 2007. VMware went public in 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a great list.
Intel went off silicon for the first time and introduced non-silicon materials into its microchips in 2007 to extend Moore's law. The internet crossed 1 billion users in late 2006. May have been a tipping point.
Yep.
Okay, and then scaled in 2007.
We'll call that 2007.
Yeah, it's close enough.
We'll give that one to you.
Close enough. By the way, solar energy took off in 2007, as did fracking, a process for
Exactly.
extracting.
Yep.
So between 2006 and 2008, our natural gas reserves increased 35%.
Wow.
That is a staggering number, and the reason they did is because of the technologies you identified. I was out at Devon Energy in Oklahoma a few months ago, and Devon, they have a control room. This is so perfect for what you guys have written about, where they have every well on a computer screen. So they have 100 computer screens tracking every well. And they have a little box over here that says, budgeted cost of this well.
Wow.
Okay? And they have another box over here that says, actual cost of this well, updated every foot, depending on the porousness of the rock that it hits.
As it's drilling?
As it's drilling.
By foot.
Foot by foot. They have a sensor in the toe of the well, of the wellhead, and it updates it every foot. And because you sit in there, watch the numbers, they can now hit, thanks to all the technologies you wrote about, a seam of gas 20 feet wide, 2 miles down, okay, with GPS and horizontal and all of this. So I think all of this happened, really, the breakthrough, around 1 year. I mean, metaphorically, but obviously they were coalesced before that. And we all missed it because of 2008. So right when we went in, when like a moving sidewalk went from 5 to 50 miles an hour, which is really the world you describe in your book, right when that happened, all of our social technologies, because that's what you're talking about, Eric. Erik Brynjolfsson uses that term, the regulating, the reforming, the managerial reform.
Yes.
Everything froze because we entered the deepest recession since 1929.
And it was a time of retrenchment, right? And that,
So you got this huge
logical response.
You got this huge dislocation. We all felt the ground moving under our feet. Whoa, my God, what happened to my moving sidewalk? And meanwhile, all the stuff that needed to go with it froze. And so when you hit a moment like this, it seems to me you really need to move fast. And my friend Dov Seidman likes to say that trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. So when there's trust in the room, you can go really fast. Trust is like a hard floor; you can jump really high.
Yep.
Lack of trust is like the Syrian desert; you can't jump a millimeter. And so at the national level, we have no trust now.
Right.
So let's talk about one reason we have no trust. And I want to go to the other side of social networks, the other side of platforms. So if you have here's what you notice if you're a columnist at the New York Times and you read your comment section. Okay.
You're not super popular?
That's right. So you read some of the crazy ass ideas that people send in, and at the same time, if you read all 500 comments, there are 5 in there that are just blindingly smart.
Yeah.
I did a column last week about TPP and why it was stupid to pull out a TPP. And I was reading the comments, and the guy wrote in and said, what we did on TPP, that was actually our Brexit. That was our equivalent of Brexit from Asia. I thought, I wish I'd thought of,
That's actually a Tom Friedman line.
it's going to be very soon. Okay.
We know
But here's what I want to ask you guys, because the other side of social networks. So I interviewed Wael Ghanem and the head of Occupy Central, and they both told me the same thing. Could not have done this without Facebook and Twitter. Wael Ghanem was the Google guy who launched the Facebook revolution in Egypt. Could not have done this without Facebook and Twitter, and we could never succeed with Facebook and Twitter. because as soon as we won,
Yep.
these social networks created rumor, innuendo, slander, and suspicion.
Which got amplified.
About us, which got amplified and scaled just the way you propagated.
Wildfire, yeah.
Like a wild. So what do we do? How do you manage that downside?
Erik, you take this one.
Well, all these technologies have growing pains, and sometimes they fail disastrously bad. And I think right now we're seeing that with the social networks in terms of fake news and the spread of that. They can rapidly amplify, as Andy was saying, good ideas, and if you have a mechanism, if you have some kind of a governance system to filter to find those 5 really brilliant things, then you can scale them up and you can conquer the world. But that doesn't happen automatically. If you just throw these technologies out there, they can easily become very, very dysfunctional. And one of the unfortunate things that I think Mark Zuckerberg and the team at Facebook caught them a bit by surprise was that they didn't expect to realize the potency of fake news and the way it had been weaponized, not just by malicious people, but sadly by a lot of people who are just looking to make a buck. Yeah. And there were people who figured out that, hey, guess what? And our colleague Sinan Aral has shown this, fake news spreads faster than real news. Yeah. That you can show this documented, it's more salacious, it's more sensational, and if you have 2 news stories, the fake news one is on average going to spread faster. And so if you're trying to make a buck and get paid by those ads, you are just not evil, but just amoral, you're going to say, hey, let's do more of this one. That's the one that's making us bucks. And so their own incentive system actually worked to amplify these very dysfunctional ways of using the technology. I don't think it's inherent in the technology. I think that these are the growing pains of a powerful revolution, and I think that they are correctable, but it requires a lot of conscious effort. And the reason we wrote the book is that we see many, many companies making mistakes on lots of different dimensions. When they get it right, there's nothing better. It's the best time in human history. But we are very much opposed to this attitude that, hey, the technology is just in it by itself wonderful. We just sit back and it's going to happen. You have to work super, super hard. And with your analogy of time of acceleration, it's more dangerous than ever to get it wrong.
And Tom, you bring up this absolutely fundamental concept and word of trust. And even in the business world, trust is this bedrock of stuff that you need to have happen. In the book, Erik and I concentrate on how technology can increase trust and facilitate trust in some new ways. For example, if somebody had told me 10 years ago that I would be hopping in the back seat of strangers' cars all around the world and happily going from point A to point B in a city and jumping out the back, and that person would be getting paid 100% of the time, this is ludicrous, right? This is nonsense. But with some combination of very clever network design, having my credit card on file, and I rate you the Uber driver, you rate me the passenger, and if either of our ratings drops too low, we're off the platform. Yeah. That is a trust virtuous circle that is kicked in.
It's a trust platform.
It's a trust platform. And after a lot of tinkering, the innovators realized that they had to get that right. And we had to get it right so we stay in strangers' bedrooms halfway around the world. We put a company in the book called BlaBlaCar. This is a French company that lets you share rides to drive from one city to another. And if there's one great way to wind up buried in a shallow ditch on the side of the road, right, it's hop in a stranger's car for a long-distance journey. This is ridiculous, except it works now because of trust. Now, what you've helped me or us understand is technology also has this weird dark side exactly with trust. And I think it gets to some of the things Erik was talking about. The fact that the great quote about a lie is halfway around the world before the truth has its boots on.
Yes.
That's unfortunately true, and we're seeing this happen over and over. Erik pointed out that there are things we can do, even in this crazy social media world, to increase trust. I think you're actually a little bit jaundiced about that. I think you might not be as confident as Erik is that we can address this problem with clever geekery.
We can. Well, I'd say one thing my problem with Facebook, and again, this is very specific to being a New York Times employee, is Facebook wanted all our readers, they wanted all our advertisers, and they wanted none of our editors.
Right.
Well, that's not on, okay? Yeah. Because the reason we are who we are is that we had this layer of editors to edit things, and they didn't want to pay for that.
Yeah. Are you questioning your bedrock faith in the First Amendment?
I'm questioning a lot of things right now. because I have seen much more the evil of social networks, and I'm keenly aware of the upsides from business. But I'm keenly aware I can actually go right now out of this room and write a fake news story from the Aspen Daily Forward. Put it up on a
there is no
Facebook page.
Aspen.
Right, exactly, and there is none, and it would be halfway around the world. And with my name on it, they would probably end up in some newspapers.
But there's a lot of people working on mechanisms to address that and failing,
Right.
but also succeeding. And we were talking to Jimmy Wales, and he was describing how there's fake news a little bit on Wikipedia, there's more on Twitter, a lot more on Facebook. They all tap into the wisdom of the crowds. People can put stuff up there and spread it, but they have slightly different governance mechanism. And some of them work better, some of them work less well. And what Andy was describing with the trust in Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, there are a bunch of people, there's a small academic industry on reputation systems. People like Chris Delarokas and Paul Resnick and Hal Varian working on that are trying to figure out how can we engender trust, how can we get reliability, how can we get veracity. It's certainly not automatic, but we have a set of tools that we've never had before. We see the failures, and they've been devastating, especially in the last election. I certainly don't want to minimize that, but the tools are out there, and I'm hopeful that these smart people, and plus, honestly, a bit of experimentation and testing and failing, that's how a lot of this happens, could potentially lead us to a system that actually has more trust, more veracity than we had before.
For example, we can use the machines to deal with some of the silliness that crowds generate. And what I mean by that is the huge social networks learned, especially over the course of 2016, that they had this category of problem. They had bot armies, they had horrible trolling problems, they had thanks to our colleague Sinan's work, we're understanding exactly how big and bad fake news is. I'm confident we can actually put machine learning and other algorithms in place to automatically tamp down on this stuff. Because like you know, everything that shows up in our Facebook feed is not just the chronological sequence of what our friends put up there. It's very carefully and individually curated for us based on a whole lot of technology in the background.
Curated not by people, but
exactly,
by machines.
Exactly right. So I would not be at all surprised if the big social networks twisted a couple dials on that to try to dampen the signal instead of amplify the signal of fake news.
Ultimately, though, it is a bit of an arms race, because as soon as they do that, there's some almost equally smart people working on the other side of it that are trying to work their way around it. And so this is a constant escalation.
Eric and I wrote a pretty optimistic book, The Machine Platform Crowd, about the business possibility of these technologies. One of the things you keep reminding us of is the business world is only one thing that's going on, and some of these things have some pretty serious dark side in the rest of our society.
I mean, and it's because of that I think there's a whole new ethics problem, because there's actually, again, Dove says this, there's no Moore's law for ethics.
Right.
So it does not go accelerate at this speed.
And especially with this balkanization of thought that's so easy to do with social media, I think your ethics can get perverted over time based on the things that you keep coming across, the people you keep interacting with, and it becomes a little easier, hopefully not, but maybe to find that other and to demonize them.
See, I really think we're actually, when you speak about the ethics, we're actually at a moral intersection we've never been at before. One, it happened in 2016. I think 2016 was the year, that's why your book is so timely and I think relevant, because 2016, I think, was the year that 51% of our lives moved to the internet. That we woke up one day in the developed world and found, boy, that is where I find a date, find a spouse, buy a book, meet my friends, buy a house, do my business, rent a car. I mean, I think...
That feels like 2016 to you.
Right, because I'll tell you why. Because two things I saw happen that year. One is in my business. So if you look at New York Times newspaper ads, they were going like this, and in 2016 they went like that.
Is that right?
It's the print ads.
Right, print ads, exactly. So we hit a waterfall.
Wow.
And the other thing that happened was, you both know, retail.
Yeah.
So the shopping center, retail, went like this, and then 2016, it went like that.
Yeah.
And so I think 2016 was the year that our lives moved to cyberspace, 51%. And my definition of cyberspace is a place where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. So there's no police there, no stoplights, no courts, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election, okay? So our lives have moved to a realm that's fundamentally God-free.
And when you think about entrepreneurship and innovation, that's awesome, right?
Exactly.
You want that to happen in a
right.
completely wide open
Your
sandbox.
platforms now just are scaling everywhere.
And you don't want innovation police. Right. You don't want an innovation bureaucracy. But you point out, again, the business world is not the only thing going on out there, and we need to be very mindful.
It's in a realm that now we're living our lives in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And I would just say, to add one other thing, it's happened at the same time. I think we're standing at a moral intersection we've never stood at before. 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us, post-Hiroshima. There had to be one country. I'm glad it was ours. Okay? Right. I think we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us, and where, because of what you guys are writing about, where all of us could actually fix everything. So we've actually never lived in such a world where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us could actually feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet if we put our minds to it now.
And it's, people underestimate that, or they ignore that all the time. That is actually within grasp, right? We can easily see that in our lifetimes. It's mind-blowing.
But what it means, Andy, is that we've actually, as a species, never been more godlike. So we're living our lives in a realm that is God-free, and we've never been more godlike.
This is a key point in both of our books, and we wrap up both books with this point, that we have more powerful tools than we've ever had in history. And that means that we, by definition, have more powerful to shape our planet than ever before. And we ultimately are the decision makers, not the machines, not the tools, but we haven't made that adjustment in thinking about what we can do. That gap of adjusting not just our decisions, but ultimately our values and how we want to use that, I think is the revolution that's still ahead of us.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful that our geek, brilliant technology friends are pushing the frontier of more technologies, but I think the rest of us, that's where the issue lies. Our political systems, our business leaders, each of us as citizens need to think about how we can use these ever more powerful tools. And that ultimately, that means thinking hard about what are the values we want. We believe that we actually can shape the future more than we could have the past. This is not something that's driven, that's inevitable. People are always asking us this question, what's going to happen to us? What's the technology going to do? And it's very frustrating because it's not what's going to happen to us, it's what we decide to do. And with these kinds of powerful, even godlike tools that you're describing, it's wonderful that we have these choices. I just hope that we tap into the better angels, the better values, and put it on a path towards solving world poverty, addressing climate change, all these other huge problems that are ahead of us that are in principle solvable.
Let me emphasize that optimism just a little bit, because it's easy to forget the fact that throughout all of human history, the only people who could materially contribute to our overall well-being had won the birth lottery. Right? They were born into some of the richest part of the world at the time. They were born into a family that was properly placed, and so they could get to the point where they were massive influencers. That's just not true anymore, right? You don't have to win the birth lottery to have access to a decent chunk of humanity's accumulated knowledge, to be able to contribute to that knowledge, to be able to acquire absolute cutting-edge skills in the most important technical disciplines in the world. That is a global, very, very almost universal capability now. Some very good things are going to come out of that.
So let's take me back to the Industrial Revolution, when again we had this gigantic shift and everything had to adapt. Because I believe so much that you guys are right. We're at the same kind of thing, but it all happens faster now. How do we get politics to accelerate to meet this moment?
Well, sir, there are some deep analogies to these other big revolutions. We learn a lot from reading history, but it's not a perfect analogy. And one of the really scary things that's different, as you point out, is things are just happening so much faster. Moore's law doubling every 18 months in computer power. We went back and did the math on the steam engine. It also doubled in power about once every 75 years, okay? So you just had a lot longer time to make the adjustments, generations. Farmers knew that, hey, this revolution is coming. A lot of our kids are not going to have to be on the farm. Grandkids, we can start putting in schools. Now it's not kids or grandkids. It's ourselves in 10 years or 5 years. So addressing the political system, I mean, we've talked to a lot of the political leaders, and one of the things that we hear that's kind of heartening is, you know what, we agree with you. We think that this Econ 101 playbook that we sometimes describe is a great way to go ahead. We get it. It makes a lot of sense. but. You know there's a but coming.
Right.
But, we can't be way out ahead of our constituents. They see a different vision. And if we try to put this stuff in place, our voters are going to vote us out of office.
Yep.
So ultimately, the solution, we think, is not simply to talk to the top political leaders, but it's to talk to all the people. I'm glad we're having this conversation here, and it's one of the reasons we wrote the book, is we need to change the national conversation. We need not just a small elite to get it, we need everybody to get it. And right now, because of what we were talking about earlier, there's so much misinformation out there. Sadly, it looks to us like the conversation is often going in the opposite direction. We need to redouble our efforts to change the national conversation. This is going to happen when each of us talk to our neighbors, our colleagues, our friends, we write letters to the editor, we change our communities and change the national conversation. It's a slow, painful process. It's the way democracies work, and we were talking earlier, maybe democracies aren't really suited for this time of rapid change, but that's the system we have right now. And for better or worse, that's the system that I think we have to work through, a bottom-up, community-based mass understanding of what's going on. No brilliant leader, I think, is going to come in and say, everybody, this is what we have to do.
So, I want to pick up on that and talk about the income inequality part of this, because I think that's really important. But there's another part of it that I think is really roiling people that I think doesn't get enough attention. So our mutual friend, Heather McGowan, likes to say, never ask a kid today what you want to be when you grow up. Because whatever it is ain't going to be there unless it's policeman or fireman. Okay. Heather's argument is only ask your kid how you want to be when you grow up. Will you have an agile learning mindset in a world where lifelong learning, you just said it, Eric, in your own way, that the period of adjustment now is now within your own lifetime.
Exactly.
In fact, it's maybe within your own BA. What you learn in your first year may be outdated by your fourth. Therefore, the ability to be a lifelong learner, long after you've left home and mom and dad aren't there to say, Andy, have you done your homework? Is going to be the single most important personal comparative advantage. Right. But that then leads to another one. And I think this is one of the things roiling society now, that it's hard to see. And it's a point that Marina Gorbis from the Institute of the Future made to me once. She said, 10 years ago, we thought the biggest problem in the world was the digital divide. Denver's got internet, and distant Colorado doesn't. We've got internet, Gabon doesn't. We both know the digital divide is rapidly disappearing. It's probably almost already gone. Anyone who wants to be connected. And her point is, connecting up to the lifelong learning point, is when that happens, the most important divide in the world is going to be the motivational divide. Who has the self-motivation to take advantage of that whole world you guys have described? Now, what you see is that there's a lot of people out there who were born and prefer to be told what to do. Yep. And by the way, they were the foundation of a great middle class. And they worked, when you told them what to do, they did it, and they did it well. Yeah. Okay? And they...
our schools trained them to do
that. Exactly. But they're not built for learning and relearning at this pace. And they don't actually have that self-motivation. And you read J.D. Vance Hillbilly Elegy, that's the subtext. Okay? There are just a lot of people. And so that's, to me, going to be a huge income inequality driver. And there's one more that I discovered. I was down at Oak Ridge National Lab, and they were showing me their carbon fiber factory. And they start with acrylics, and they turn into carbon fiber. Really long, it's like a block-long building. All these machines.
It's literally a drawn-out process.
Yeah, exactly. And all these machines, and not a lot of people around. The woman running is an African-American woman who was an expert in acrylics. This is in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And she takes me back into the control room. And there are two guys sitting in front of computer screens. And they're both kind of big, I would say slightly overweight guys. And they look like a couple of good old boys. And I asked her to come out of the room for a second. I said, do those guys have computer science degrees? Okay. And she said, no, they don't need to. The machines are so smart now. You actually don't need that much intelligence to run this whole line. So I'm thinking, I wonder how much they're paid. Because I'm thinking of them as having high-skilled jobs. You know what I mean? But
because most of the other people are gone from the factory.
Right, exactly.
The ones that are left.
So I thought these were the guys who are going to reap the profits. Yeah. And they both look like they had high school degrees and not much more, maybe local community college. That our machines now getting so smart that you even think of these good jobs, but that's just an intro. Talk about the.
Were those guys getting well paid or not?
I think I think she said it was the 40 to 50 range.
So middle class-ish.
Yeah, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, probably goes well. But the third point they made is that because of that, she said, we have no problem actually training people up for these machines. Actually, the mayor of the town said this to me. Our problem is getting people with soft skills, people who will show up, sit up, dress up, clean up, and shut up, okay, are actually our biggest problem. Yeah. That we have a real problem finding people with the soft skills. And in this generation coming up, this is a scary figure. They had to interview 400 people to find 5 who can pass a drug test and don't have a criminal record and have the soft skills. And so talk about the income.
So fix that problem.
That's right, exactly. So talk about the income inequality. We were talking about Kai-Fu's article. Implications of this.
Let me try to bring both those threads together: the inequality and the training and the preparation of our skills, of our human capital. Because all three of us agree, I think, that our current educational system is doing a brilliant job of turning out the workers we needed 70 years ago.
Right. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Right? To just
perfect.
Yep. To just get listened to by authority and have some basic
facts,
skills.
follow instructions.
Right. Like you point out, we don't need those workers anymore. We need ones with these character traits, with tenacity and grit. We need people with soft skills, interpersonal skills. Erik and I found some wonderful research that we put in the book. Those soft interpersonal skills are even more highly valued in the economy today than STEM skills. If you can put them together, life is awesome.
I call that STEMpathy jobs.
So, why did I know he'd have a better way to talk about this?
It's the combination of two where the real money is going to be.
And all we can tell you is how correct you are because the data are supporting this like crazy, but we're not teaching those skills to career launching people, let alone mid-career people, hillbilly elegy kinds of communities. This is tough homework. It's easier for me to think about how we can change primary education than how we can grab those mid-career people and bring them back in. It's really urgent homework. The inequality is fascinating, and I think all three of us have talked about this before. I think we need to diagnose the problem correctly. I think it is not the existence of super rich people. And America has always been kind of a weird country in that we don't mind rich people. And my thought experiment is if we really disliked rich people, would Donald Trump be president? I don't see that at all. I think the actual problem is stagnation and hopelessness and a feeling like I can't get to a better place from where my family and I are now. That's a different problem, and I think the discussion about inequality misses that problem sometimes to our.
To validate that point, and Don Barrett made this point to me, which is that a lot of people think that everyone wanted change, and they voted for Obama because they wanted change. Actually, they wanted help. Okay,
which is a different word.
Which is why the same white working class people actually voted for Obama who voted for Trump. So the idea this was some giant white racist backlash is actually not, that's making it too easy.
But change and help went together because the system, let's face it, was not working
Good point. That's right.
for a whole bunch of people. That median wages had stagnated. To Andy's point, for the past 20 years, if you're at the 50th percentile or below, you saw no income growth. That was not because the economy had stagnated. We have record levels of GDP per person, more millionaires, more billionaires than ever. So there's a huge amount of wealth being created, but it's not working for a lot of people. Part of it is because those routine information processing skills, those routine kinds of jobs that the American middle class was built on, they're disappearing.
Yes.
And so the people who are doing them, the demand for that kind of labor is falling, and they need to change. And a big part of it, exactly as you said, is it's a motivation type of thing. They have to think about not how to do what their boss is telling them. If somebody can describe in great detail exactly what needs to be done, it's going to be outsourced. They're going to say, we can send that to someone else to do it in great detail. Or that's actually the criteria for writing a computer program, for getting a machine to do it, if you can really describe exactly what needs to be done. So you're in the bullseye of those two great waves, and I think the automation one is even bigger than the offshoring one. But your point about this digital divide actually leading to a motivation divide. I mean, I see that in the kids in my neighborhood. I have a 16-year-old son now. For the past 5 years, he's been a fanatic about just like going on Khan Academy and looking at things. I said, well, you know, I told him, why don't you go and look at this math video? I'm trying to be a good parent, nudge him that way. So he goes there. 3 hours later, he's been looking at the Civil War, reading about biology and genomics. He's doing all this college-level stuff. And his friends, some of his friends are doing the same thing. They're eating this stuff up. But right next door, there's other friends. They have access to the identical technologies, and they're just not interested. And so now you got kids that all at one point were all in 6th grade together, for better or worse, well, mostly for worse, kind of learning the exact same thing and not having opportunity. And now some of them are just like way different sets of them. So we probably have a bigger gap on lots of those dimensions than we did before, not a smaller gap, thanks to this digital infrastructure.
As the conversations have gone on this week and we've listened to them, I've been struck by the fact that there are kind of two narratives for what's going on. One is that the economy or capitalism have been hijacked by some combination of rich people and billionaires and bankers and these other forces out there. And like, there is some truth. There's some rent seeking going on in the economy, right? Maybe more than there used to be. I think I can speak for Erik. The two of us believe that the deeper, the much more accurate narrative is that the economy has been changed. And it's been changed by the forces you talk about.
It's actually reshaped.
Reshaped primarily, quickly, especially in the last 10 years, faster and faster by these tectonic forces of globalization and tech progress. Depending on which of those two things you believe, you're gonna advocate very, very different changes and interventions, and we better get this right.
Or worse yet, half the economy's changed and half of it hasn't and isn't keeping up. So there's a bunch of people that don't have the new skills, that don't have the new types of organizational structures, and that disconnect is causing wrenching, painful, suicidal feelings in a lot of the people.
Almost what you're saying is half the economy has changed and half the people have changed. At the same time, and half really have not.
And the answer, just to, not to put too fine a point on it, is not to slow down the technology.
Exactly.
And say, let's go back.
This is important.
That is exactly the wrong prescription. The answer, of course, is to let's embrace the future going forward. But it's easy for us to sit here and talk about that. It's a lot harder to put it in place.
But Erik's point is fundamental. We hear really thoughtful, kind of well-intentioned people say, "Well, we better ratchet back the tech progress." And to me, that's saying let's slow down the rate at which the world becomes a better place, at which we take better care of the most vulnerable, at which we stop cooking the planet. Let's slow let's not slow all that down.
Some questions.
Yeah, I'm going to go to that right now.
Let's just help the rest of the people out.
I mean, I actually think the faster the world gets, the more radically open you want to be, because you'll get the signals first and you'll attract the most.
Exactly. The smart organizations, the smart people do exactly that. They do.
Nice.
You were just talking before the thing about how you're going around visiting Louisville, Kentucky, and these other places and learning the signals.
They're the ones who are
Closing down is a terrible strategy in this world.
We'd rather not go to you. I'd really rather continue with them. But what the hell, you're right here.
Oh, here, there's a mic over there.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Sushant. I'm Aspen Ideas Scholar. I have an observation I wanted to share, and I want to get your reflections on this. I'm really interested and actually worried about our governance systems. I feel like we live in a time of three major deficits. One is a deficit of morality, a deficit of leadership and stewardship, and the other deficit is on dynamic governance and dynamic regulation. How will some of these technologies and the things that you're describing maybe impact power distribution and ideas of decentralization in governance structures? I'll give one example. I'm building a startup focused on self-management, helping groups of people inside companies, inside communities, manage themselves, make important consequential decisions using AI and crowd intelligence so that they can become much more self-managed, self-reliant. Partly because you see a lot of low systems resilience, and you see centralization leading to a lot of abuse of power and a lot of rent seeking, right? So I just want your reflections on whether this is a correct observation or not.
Well, this is one of the biggest revolutions. We recently did a podcast with Andreessen Horowitz, and we were talking to the folks there, and they were saying that their big investments were very much in looking into how you can leverage the crowd more effectively. Also, platforms and machines, but particularly the crowd. And there's no one formula that does it successfully. There's different companies. There's Kaggle, there's Topcoder, there's Wikipedia. There's many different ways of doing this. The blockchain, I mean, that's huge. But let me describe what Kaggle did just last week. This is a community, started with a few hundred, few thousand data scientists. Now it's up to 1 million data scientists across the planet. The TSA, part of our government, has decided that they don't have all the smart people in their organization. In fact, the truth is that no matter what organization you work for, most of the smart people work for a different organization. That's just math, okay? Yeah. So if you want to be smart, you want to tap into those other smart people. They have used Kaggle to reach out to those data scientists, and now they take the images as you go through those imaging systems, and to speed the process up, they're asking those million data scientists around the world to see if they can figure out a new and better way to identify the images, speed them to. But I think it's a green shoot. It's an example how even government organizations that traditionally have been very sort of, let's face it, bureaucratic, maybe defensive, very careful about reaching out more broadly, are leveraging a more decentralized, crowd-oriented method. And the competition is just underway. It's $1.5 million. You can enter it if you want. The one thing I'm totally confident of is that they will come up with a dramatically better solution. We've seen it happen so many times than what we have today. And it's not just the TSA, it's more and more organizations that are tapping into these more decentralized ways of doing it. Kaggle is one mechanism. People are, and being funded by VCs, are exploring lots of other mechanisms.
We spend the last 2 chapters of the book exploring exactly what I think you're talking about, these technologies of radical decentralization. And like I'm sure you know, there are all kinds of blockchain-ish, distributed organizations, smart contracts, experiments going on these days, and it's going to take us in some really interesting places. I am personally skeptical that they're going to remove the need for good old-fashioned organizations and management, but let's go run that experiment and find out.
Bill.
Yes, Bill Nitze.
Mr. Nitze.
I'm just thinking, is there what I'm going to call an ethical nanotech, where you can get out to a little town in East Tennessee and provide something that is enough fun and engaging enough so, you know, Bubba Jr. will get off the pills, stop looking at the video games, stop beating up whoever, and get engaged.
Yeah.
And if you get him hooked, then you can get him into a ratchet where he plays the game and he moves up the social skills ladder. And it becomes more and more and more fun. His self-image goes up and up and up. The opportunities he sees in his space become bigger and bigger and bigger. You get my idea. You have any little bots in the crowd that could do that?
There are some great examples of exactly that kind of thing happening. One thing technology is doing these days is reducing the minimum efficient scale that you need to, for example, build something, make something, repair something, fix something. There are these things called either maker spaces or fab labs, which are pretty cost-effective, actual physical things you can drop in East Tennessee and start letting Bubba 3D print, start letting him laser cut stuff, start letting him use CAD systems so he can take some of those great old, mess with the engine in the backyard skills and apply them in a very, very different domain. So I think there's hope along exactly those lines.
Let me just say one thing, but to build on Andy, because I think Andy gave a great answer for the technology. We actually do have a bot for that also. It's actually called Good Parenting. No, actually, I'm dead serious about that. I think the faster the world gets, the more everything you cannot download matters more than ever. All the stuff you have to upload the old-fashioned way, good parent to good child, good teacher to good student, good pastor to good flock. I think those old-time values, the faster the world gets, they matter more than ever. And so I think when you pair that with what Andy just described, then you have stempathy.
And let me add one more element, because I think, to even more optimistic, is I think the fundamentals are really good. When I see kids and you put a set of blocks in front of a little girl, what's the first thing that she starts to do?
Eat them.
Well, lick them, and then after that, starts to build things. You put a piece of paper and crayon, they start drawing things.
The natural.
People naturally just love being creative. You know, no one has to force them. No one has to say, hey, we're going to pay you an extra bonus if you're more creative. No, people love being creative. And if we could get the hell out of the way, and if we could put those kinds of tools that Andy described and more, put them in front of people, I think we'll see an explosion or a rediscovery of a lot of our innate love of creating things. And that's I think, some pretty good fundamentals.
We got yeah, right here.
Hi, Alicia John with EY. Could you talk a little bit more about the implications of blockchain? Quickly.
Very quickly.
Yeah, so the blockchain is a ledger of who owns the bitcoins around the world. Okay, banks have ledgers, so what? Blockchain is deeply weird because it is distributed, it is global, it is accurate, it is resistant to hacking. People have been trying to hack it, it doesn't work, so it's immutable over time. It is not owned by anybody, it is not controlled by anybody, and as far as we can tell, it is not controllable by any one entity because it's spread in computers all over the world. All right, that's weird. It's even weirder because you're not limited to keeping track of transactions in blockchain. You can stick code in it. You can embed a contract in code and stick that in blockchain. So it executes automatically no matter what anybody wants to have happen. These are really new technologies. Tom, you're off by 1 year. Yeah. The blockchain paper was written in 2008.
Interesting.
So we'll backdate it and give you 2007 on
I
that.
was working on it in 2007.
And putting that in place is less than 5 years old. We don't know where this is taking us. Some really cool things are going to happen.
We'll take one more quick one because it's so good. I mean, please.
Yeah, we all saw Jurassic Park, and I think it was Jeff Goldblum there said chaos theory, things are going to, blow
Nature
up,
finds a way, right?
And they did. So are we as technologists, my name is Marty Sprinzen, Silicon Valley, are we as technologists projecting linear extrapolation when that's not going to happen? And maybe even worse than unintended consequences, discontinuities, or even emergent behavior. That's what scares me.
Yeah.
And same thing with climate change, by the way, but let's talk technology. True. So what are your guys' thoughts? And we have a great brain trust up here. Is that going to happen?
Well, this is the most disturbing and biggest challenge for us right now. And one of the worst critiques we got of our last book was saying, when we got to the recommendation section, we were proposing linear solutions to exponential problems. And it's very hard because it's also been said that the greatest failing of the human mind, including ours, is the inability to understand the exponential function. Things are just taking off so fast, and it's very hard to understand the rate of change and how to make those adjustments. I don't feel like we have a complete grip on all the ways that we're going to have to solve those problems. We can do a better job of describing what the issues are, and there's some economics 101 principles that I think are a good first step. If we just got that right, we'd be a good way towards solving the problems. But this is really what our life's work is at the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, in writing these books, in working with all our colleagues at MIT, is putting more brain power, more effort towards trying to come up with solutions to these exponential opportunities and challenges. It is the great challenge that our society has over the next decade and beyond. And I'd love to see more people thinking about it in this kind of a way. If we crowdsource the solution, I think we'll have a better chance of addressing your question.
You know, one of the reasons I've so admired Andy and Erik, and somewhere we were separated at birth, is because in their work, though they come out of the university and I come out of journalism, they do what I aspire to do, and that's to be a translator from English to English. To take really complex subjects that they've just described, the new business model, basically, and translate into language we can all understand. And today, I think, in a time of rapid change, that matters more than ever. I quote Marie Curie in my book as saying, "Now is the time to understand more so we may fear less." And if there's ever a time for us to understand more so we may fear less, it's a time of rapid change. And when we have people now who are in the fear industry, there's actually people who are trying to make us afraid of everything. And unfortunately, these tools are empowering all of them.
Amen.
Give them this is a fantastic panel, please.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Oh, yeah. Don't go anywhere. Take out your wallet. There's a book signing. Where is it at? Just in the lobby. If you don't buy this book, you're really stupid, okay? All right, so.
I'm going to tweet that. Thank you all.
Go ahead.